The boy didn't even notice the horse at first. His hands were trembling too hard as he unfolded the faded letter sitting on his knees. The porch beneath him creaked in the evening wind, and the abandoned farmhouse around him looked like it had been forgotten for decades. Broken windows rattled softly. Dry grass swayed around the empty barns. Everything about the place felt dead. But then came the sound, a slow breath from somewhere behind him. Deep. Heavy. Alive. When 18-year-old Ethan Carter turned around, he froze. Standing in the tall golden grass was a massive chestnut horse with scars across its neck and eyes so sharp they almost looked human. The animal stared directly at him, unmoving, like it had been waiting. And in that moment, Ethan realized the abandoned horse farm he had just inherited was hiding something nobody in town wanted him to discover. Before we go further, take a second to like and subscribe if stories about loyalty, mystery, and incredible horses inspire you. Because this story, it only gets more unbelievable from here. Ethan had spent most of his life believing he was completely alone. His mother died when he was 10. His father disappeared 2 years later without explanation, leaving behind nothing except unpaid bills and rumors whispered by neighbors who pitied the quiet little boy living at the edge of town. After that, Ethan bounced between relatives who barely tolerated him. By the time he turned 18, he had learned one thing very clearly. Nobody was coming to save him. So when a lawyer showed up at the diner where Ethan worked washing dishes, he assumed it was another problem. Another debt. Another reminder that life never gave him a break. But the lawyer slid a rusted key across the table and said something Ethan never expected. "You inherited Blackwood Farm." Ethan nearly laughed. Everyone in town knew about Blackwood Farm. It sat miles outside town near the hills, abandoned for nearly 20 years after a mysterious fire destroyed one of the barns. People avoided the place. Kids dared each other to sneak onto the property at night. Some claimed they heard horses screaming there after dark. Others believed the owner had gone insane before disappearing. But according to the papers in Ethan's shaking hands, the farm now belonged to him. What about money? Ethan asked carefully. The lawyer avoided eye contact. No money. Just the land. And the horse. That made Ethan pause. What horse? The lawyer hesitated again before answering. The one nobody could catch. Hours later, Ethan found himself standing on the porch of the decaying farmhouse with the old letter in his hand. The handwriting belonged to his father. "If you are reading this, son, then I never got the chance to explain the truth." Ethan's throat tightened immediately. This farm belonged to your grandfather. But after the accident, everything fell apart. I tried to protect you from what happened here. From what I did. The horse out there, his name is Shadow. Don't trust anyone who tries to take him. He remembers everything. Ethan slowly lowered the letter. That was when he heard the breathing behind him. Now the horse stood only 20 feet away. Shadow was enormous. Dust clung to his coat, but beneath the dirt Ethan could see powerful muscles moving under scarred skin. One of the horse's ears was torn slightly at the edge. Old rope marks wrapped faintly around his neck like ghosts from another life. Yet despite looking wild, the horse carried himself with strange intelligence. Calm. Watchful. Almost cautious. Ethan stepped off the porch carefully. "It's okay," he whispered. Shadow instantly pinned his ears back. The reaction was explosive. The horse slammed a hoof into the dirt so hard it sent dust flying everywhere. Ethan stumbled backward in fear as Shadow let out a violent warning snort. Every instinct screamed at Ethan to run. But something stopped him. Maybe it was loneliness. Maybe it was the strange feeling that the horse understood him somehow. Whatever it was, Ethan stayed. And slowly, Shadow stopped moving. For several seconds, boy and horse simply stared at each other while the sun sank lower behind the hills. Then headlights suddenly appeared down the road. A truck pulled onto the property fast. 3 men climbed out. The tallest one wore a black hat and walked forward like he already owned the place. Ethan recognized him immediately. Wade Granger, the wealthiest ranch owner in the county, and one of the most feared men in town. Wade's eyes locked onto Shadow instantly. "Well," he said coldly. "Looks like the ghost horse is still alive." Shadow reacted immediately, stepping protectively backward into the grass, muscles tense. Ethan frowned. "You know this horse?" Wade gave a dry laugh. "Know him? That animal cost me $50,000 and nearly killed 2 riders." He stepped closer. "I came to buy him years ago. Your father refused." "My father knew this horse." "Oh, your father knew a lot more than you think." The air suddenly felt colder. Ethan noticed Shadow watching Wade carefully, almost nervously. Wade reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded document. "I'll make this easy for you, kid. Sell me the horse and the farm tonight. You walk away with enough money to start over somewhere else." Ethan stared at him. "Why would you pay for a broken farm?" Wade's smile faded slightly. "Because that horse belongs to me." Shadow suddenly let out a furious scream unlike anything Ethan had ever heard. The horse charged forward several steps, forcing Wade backward in shock. The men behind Wade reached instinctively toward ropes in the truck. "Easy!" Wade barked. But Shadow wasn't calming down. On the wall above the bed was a photograph that stopped Ethan's heart completely. It showed his father standing beside a younger version of Shadow. But they weren't alone. Standing beside them was Wade Granger. And written across the bottom of the picture in faded ink were 4 terrifying words. "We swore never again." Ethan stared at the photograph while thunder rumbled outside. Then suddenly, from somewhere deep inside the property, Shadow began screaming into the night. Not crying. Not neighing. Screaming. And Ethan realized something horrifying. The horse wasn't afraid of the farm. The horse was afraid of what was coming back to it. And hidden somewhere inside Blackwood Farm was the secret that destroyed his family forever. Ethan ran outside the moment he heard Shadow's scream echo across Blackwood Farm. The sound tore through the night like pure terror, bouncing off the old barns and empty hills surrounding the property. Rain clouds had swallowed the moon, and the entire farm now looked like something abandoned by time itself. Ethan's boots pounded through the wet grass as another scream came from the far pasture. This time it sounded worse. Desperate. Angry. Afraid. "Shadow!" Ethan yelled. Lightning flashed across the sky. For one split second, Ethan saw the horse near the burned barn at the edge of the property. Shadow was circling wildly, stomping the mud, nostrils flaring as if something inside the old structure terrified him. Ethan slowed carefully. Every instinct told him the horse might bolt or attack if pushed too hard. But instead of running away, Shadow suddenly looked directly at Ethan, then turned toward the barn doors. Like he wanted Ethan to follow him. The massive horse backed away slowly, never taking his eyes off the building. Another lightning strike illuminated the barn. And Ethan noticed something strange. The heavy chain wrapped around the doors looked brand new. Not old. Not rusted. Someone had been there recently. A chill crawled down his spine. The burned barn was supposed to be abandoned after the fire 20 years ago. That's what everyone in town believed. But now Ethan stepped closer and realized the truth was much darker. Fresh boot prints covered the mud outside the entrance. Someone was hiding something inside. Before Ethan could think twice, he grabbed the chain and pulled it loose. The barn door groaned open. The smell hit him first, smoke, mold, and something metallic lingering deep in the air. Ethan covered his nose as he stepped into the darkness. Rain drummed loudly against the roof overhead while Shadow remained outside, pacing nervously near the entrance. "Easy," Ethan whispered toward the horse. But Shadow suddenly slammed his hoof against the ground again, warning him. Ethan turned his flashlight toward the back of the barn. At first, all he saw were old tools, broken stalls, and blackened wood from the fire years earlier. Then the light landed on something hidden beneath a top. A safe. Ethan's breathing slowed. He walked toward it carefully and pulled the top away. The metal box was old but untouched by the flames. And scratched into the front in shaky handwriting were words that made Ethan's stomach twist. For Ethan only. His father had hidden this. Hands trembling, Ethan searched nearby shelves until he found a rusted key taped beneath a beam. Somehow, he already knew it would fit. The lock clicked open. Inside the safe were stacks of documents, old photographs, newspaper clippings, and a small revolver wrapped in cloth. Ethan stared at the gun in disbelief. But then he noticed the newspaper article sitting on top. Local rider missing after Blackwood farm fire. The photo underneath nearly made Ethan drop everything. The missing rider was Wade Granger's younger brother. And according to the article, he vanished the same night the barn burned down. Ethan's pulse pounded harder as he dug deeper into the box. More papers revealed debts, land disputes, and handwritten notes between his father and Wade. At first they sounded like friends. Partners even. But the later letters became darker. Angry. One note stood out immediately. Wade wants Shadow because he knows what the horse saw. Ethan frowned. What could a horse possibly see? Then another photograph slipped from the folder. This one changed everything. It showed Wade's missing brother lying unconscious beside Shadow near a riverbank. Ethan's father stood beside them covered in blood. And on the back of the photo was a sentence written quickly in panic. The horse tried to save him. A loud noise suddenly exploded outside. Truck doors. Ethan instantly shut off the flashlight. Voices echoed through the rain. He's here somewhere. Wade. Ethan's heart nearly stopped. Shadow let out another furious scream outside the barn, followed by the sound of hooves pounding violently through mud. He's protecting the kid, another man muttered. Ethan quickly shoved the documents into his backpack just as footsteps approached the barn entrance. Then he saw flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. Search everything, Wade ordered coldly. Ethan ducked behind old wooden stalls, barely breathing. Outside, Shadow exploded into chaos. Outside, Shadow stood silently beneath the rain. Listening too. Then the recording revealed the horrifying truth. Wade's brother tried to stop him during the argument. They fought inside the barn. A lantern fell. The fire spread too fast. But before we could save him, the horses panicked. Static interrupted briefly. Then came the final sentence. Shadow dragged Wade's brother out of the flames alive. Ethan's eyes widened. Alive. But Wade left him there afterward because his brother threatened to expose everything. The tape clicked softly. And then came the words that changed Ethan forever. Shadow remembers what happened. That's why Wade wants him dead. The cabin fell silent except for the rain hammering against the roof. Ethan sat frozen beside the cassette recorder, unable to breathe properly. Across from him, Shadow stood just outside the doorway, water dripping from his scarred coat as lightning flashed behind him. The horse looked exhausted, but alert, watching the woods, listening, as if he already knew danger was getting closer. Ethan slowly replayed the final sentence from the tape inside his head. Shadow remembers what happened. That's why Wade wants him dead. It sounded impossible. Crazy even. But the more Ethan thought about the horse's behavior, the more it made terrifying sense. Shadow wasn't acting wild because he hated humans. He was acting hunted. Every violent reaction, every fearful glance toward Wade, every scream near the burned barn, it all pointed toward trauma buried deep inside the animal. And somehow, Ethan understood that feeling better than anyone. Because for years, he had carried invisible scars too. The silence inside the cabin suddenly broke. Engines. Multiple trucks. Ethan's blood ran cold. They found us, he whispered. Shadow immediately lifted his head and let out a low warning snort. Headlights appeared between the trees outside. Wade's men. Ethan grabbed the revolver from his backpack with shaking hands, though he barely knew how to use it. Fear tightened his chest, but something stronger was beginning to rise underneath it now. Anger. His father hadn't abandoned him. He had been hiding the truth. And now people were hunting Ethan for discovering it. Come on, Ethan whispered to Shadow. The horse backed away from the cabin immediately, ready to run again. But before Ethan could climb onto him, another voice echoed through the woods. Wait. A woman stepped out from behind the trees with her hands raised carefully. She looked around 40 years old, soaked from the rain, with tired eyes and muddy boots. Ethan instinctively pointed the revolver toward her. Who are you? The woman looked directly at Shadow first. And to Ethan's surprise, the horse didn't react aggressively. Instead, Shadow relaxed slightly. My name is Clara, the woman said softly. I used to work at Blackwood Farm. Ethan narrowed his eyes. How did you find us? Because Shadow led me here years ago. The horse walked slowly toward Clara, breathing heavily. She gently reached toward his neck, and for the first time Ethan witnessed something incredible. Shadow allowed himself to be touched. No screaming. No panic. Just quiet trust. Ethan stared in disbelief. You know him? Clara nodded sadly. I helped raise him. Another truck engine roared closer through the woods. No time, Clara whispered urgently. If Wade finds the tape, you're both dead. Those words hit hard. Both. Not just Ethan. Shadow too. Ethan finally lowered the revolver. Then help me understand what's happening. Clara looked toward the horse again, emotion filling her face. Shadow was never supposed to survive that fire, she said quietly. But he saved 3 people that night. Ethan frowned. 3. Clara hesitated. Then she revealed the twist nobody saw coming. One of them was you. Ethan felt the world stop moving. What? You were there that night, Ethan. The boy staggered backward in confusion. No, that's impossible. I was a kid. You were 6 years old, Clara replied. Your father brought you to the barn during the argument because he didn't trust leaving you alone at the farmhouse. When the fire started, everyone panicked. Smoke filled the building. Horses broke through the stalls. Her voice cracked slightly. Your father got trapped. Ethan's hands trembled violently now. And Shadow, he whispered. Clara looked directly at the horse. Shadow carried you out through the flames. Tears filled Ethan's eyes instantly. Fragments of forgotten memories suddenly flashed through his mind. Smoke. Heat. A powerful heartbeat beneath him. Someone screaming his name. For years Ethan believed those memories were nightmares. But they were real. Shadow had saved his life. The horse slowly stepped toward Ethan and lowered his head slightly, almost cautiously, like he sensed the boy finally understood. Ethan reached out with trembling fingers. For the first time, he touched Shadow's face. The horse flinched slightly, then stayed still. That single moment shattered something inside Ethan completely. After years of loneliness, abandonment, and pain, he realized the one soul that had protected him all along wasn't human. It was the horse standing in front of him. If this story is touching your heart so far, don't forget to subscribe and share it with someone who believes animals can change lives forever. Because what happens next would leave the entire town speechless. Suddenly, gunshots exploded somewhere behind the trees. Clara ducked instantly. They're close. Shadow reared violently as another shot echoed through the woods. They're trying to scare him into running, Clara yelled. But Wade wasn't trying to scare the horse. He was trying to corner him. Headlights surrounded the forest from multiple directions now. Ethan realized Wade had planned this carefully. They weren't searching randomly anymore. They were hunting. Why does Wade want the farm so badly? Ethan asked desperately. Clara hesitated again. Then she delivered another devastating truth. Because there's proof buried underneath the burned barn. Ethan froze. What kind of proof? Documents. Records. Money transfers. Names of buyers. Clara swallowed hard. Your father hid evidence tying Wade to an illegal horse trafficking network stretching across 3 states. Ethan's pulse exploded. That explained everything. The fire. The missing brother. The threats. Even the inheritance itself. Wade wasn't trying to buy the farm. He was trying to erase it. Another flashlight beam cut through the woods nearby. This way, a man shouted. Clara grabbed Ethan's arm immediately. There's an old tunnel beneath the property, she whispered. Your grandfather built it during storms decades ago. It connects the woods to the... And in that exact moment, Ethan realized he would risk everything for the horse too. But before anyone could move, a deafening explosion shook the stable. The old floor beneath them suddenly cracked apart. And Ethan, Clara, Wade, and Shadow all plunged into the darkness below. The ground disappeared beneath them in a violent crash of splintering wood and dust. Ethan felt himself falling through complete darkness as the stable collapsed overhead. Then came impact. Hard. Pain exploded through his shoulder as he slammed against cold dirt underground. Somewhere nearby, Clara screamed. Metal chains rattled. Horseshoes scraped stone. And then everything went silent. For several seconds Ethan couldn't breathe. Dust filled the air so thick it choked him. Weak beams of moonlight slipped through cracks above, barely illuminating the underground chamber they had fallen into. Ethan groaned and pushed himself upward painfully. "Clara," he coughed. "I'm here," she answered weakly nearby. Then came another sound. A soft, heavy breath. Shadow. Relief flooded Ethan instantly. The horse stood a few feet away in the darkness, shaken but alive. Dirt covered his coat, and one front leg trembled slightly from the fall, but he immediately moved toward Ethan the moment the boy stood up. "It's okay," Ethan whispered, placing a hand against Shadow's neck. The horse leaned into him gently. Trust. Real trust now. But the moment didn't last long. A flashlight suddenly flickered on across the underground chamber. Wade Granger slowly stood from the rubble holding the shotgun tightly in one hand. Blood trickled from a cut above his eye, but his expression looked more dangerous than ever. And now Ethan finally saw where they had fallen. An underground storage room hidden beneath Blackwood Farm. Old horse stalls lined the walls. Rusted cages sat stacked in corners. Chains dangled from beams overhead. Dust-covered crates filled the room alongside shelves packed with ancient files and ledgers. It looked less like a stable, and more like a prison. Clara stared around in horror. "Oh my God." Wade's face darkened immediately. "You should have stayed out of this." Ethan slowly realized the truth. This wasn't just evidence of horse trafficking. This was where the stolen horses had been hidden before transport. Shadow suddenly became restless beside him, breathing harder now. The horse's eyes darted around the underground room wildly, filled with panic and memory. Ethan could almost feel the trauma flooding back into the animal. "He remembers this place," Clara whispered. Wade raised the shotgun slightly. "That horse remembers too much." Before Ethan could react, Shadow let out a furious scream that shook the underground chamber itself. The horse stomped violently against the dirt floor, ears pinned back, muscles trembling with fear and rage. And suddenly Ethan saw it. Burn marks on the walls. This was where the fire had started. The realization hit everyone at once. Wade's brother hadn't died in the upper barn. He died down here. Clara slowly turned toward Wade in disbelief. "You locked them underground." Wade said nothing, but his silence confirmed everything. Years ago, Wade had hidden abused horses beneath Blackwood Farm while making illegal deals in secret. When his brother threatened to expose the operation, the argument turned violent. The lantern fell. Fire spread through the tunnels. And innocent animals became trapped underground. All except one. Shadow. The horse had escaped. And carried Ethan to safety. Wade's breathing grew uneven now, almost unstable. "You don't understand," he muttered. "I built everything from nothing. Nobody cared how hard I worked. Nobody cared when ranchers lost money. This farm was supposed to save us." "You tortured animals," Ethan snapped. "I survived." "No," Clara said coldly. "You destroyed lives." For the first time, Wade looked cornered. Not physically. Emotionally. Like the weight of 20 years was finally crushing him. But desperate people become dangerous. Wade suddenly aimed the shotgun directly at Ethan. "Give me the tape." Ethan froze. The cassette recorder was still inside his backpack. "That recording destroys you," Ethan whispered. Wade's eyes filled with fury. "It destroys everyone." Shadow immediately stepped between Ethan and the shotgun again. The horse stood protectively in front of the boy without hesitation. Wade's hands tightened around the weapon. "You stupid animal," he growled. Then he pulled the trigger. Boom! The explosion deafened the room. Surrounded Wade carefully while cameras from local news crews began arriving behind them. Apparently someone had leaked information fast. Everything was collapsing around Wade now. His empire. His secrets. His lies. But in the middle of all the chaos, Ethan only looked at Shadow. The horse stood quietly beside him beneath the rising morning sun, exhausted and trembling slightly from everything they survived. Then something incredible happened. Shadow gently rested his head against Ethan's shoulder. And for the first time in his life, Ethan didn't feel alone anymore. Morning sunlight slowly spread across Blackwood Farm as emergency crews searched through the collapsed tunnels beneath the property. News vans crowded the dirt roads. Police officers moved between broken fences and burned ruins carrying boxes of evidence from underground. The entire town had finally learned the truth hidden beneath the farm for 20 years. But the story spreading across television screens that morning wasn't just about Wade Granger's crimes. It was about the horse. The wild chestnut stallion who survived fire, abuse, and decades of fear, only to save a boy's life twice. And standing beside Shadow near the old farmhouse, Ethan still struggled to believe any of it was real. Exhaustion covered his face. Dirt stained his clothes. His hands were scraped and bruised from the night before. Yet for the first time since childhood, there was something different in his eyes. Hope. Clara walked toward him carrying 2 cups of coffee wrapped in steam. "You should eat something too," she said gently. Ethan accepted the cup quietly. "I still feel like I'm dreaming." Clara smiled sadly. "Trauma does that sometimes." Nearby, reporters tried getting closer to Shadow for photos, but the horse remained cautious. Officers kept everyone back carefully after seeing how protective he had become around Ethan. Every time someone unfamiliar approached too fast, Shadow immediately shifted closer to the boy. Watching. Guarding. Trusting only him. Sheriff Dalton eventually stepped onto the porch holding a thick folder filled with recovered documents. "It's worse than we thought," he admitted quietly. "The tunnels connect to transport routes outside the county. Wade's operation had been running for years before the fire." Ethan shook his head slowly. "My father tried stopping him." "He did," the sheriff replied. "And he paid for it." The old sheriff looked genuinely ashamed now. "I should have listened back then." Clara crossed her arms. "A lot of people should have." Silence settled briefly over the farm. Then Ethan asked the question haunting him most. "What really happened to my father?" Sheriff Dalton exhaled heavily before answering. "After the fire, Wade threatened your family. Your father gathered evidence and planned to expose everything publicly. But before he could," the sheriff paused. "He disappeared." Ethan's chest tightened painfully. "You mean Wade killed him?" "We don't know yet," Dalton admitted honestly. "But we found signs someone had been living secretly near the property for years." Ethan frowned immediately. "What?" The sheriff handed him a photograph recovered from one of the hidden tunnels. It showed a tiny campsite deep in the woods beyond Blackwood Farm. Blankets. Lanterns. Recent footprints. And carved into one tree nearby were words that made Ethan's heart pound. "Watch over Shadow." The handwriting looked exactly like his father's. Clara stared at the photo in shock. "You think he's alive?" Nobody answered. Because suddenly, it didn't seem impossible anymore. Before Ethan could process the thought, shouting erupted near the road. A black SUV had just arrived. Several wealthy ranch owners stepped out alongside reporters asking aggressive questions. Apparently news of Blackwood Farm's hidden tunnels had already spread across the state. Some people looked horrified. Others looked nervous. Because if Wade's operation involved powerful buyers, this story was about to become much bigger. One reporter suddenly shouted toward Ethan. "Is it true the horse saved you from the fire as a child?" Cameras immediately turned toward him. Ethan looked at Shadow standing quietly beside the fence. For a moment, the horse met his eyes calmly. And Ethan realized something important. This wasn't Shadow's story anymore. It was theirs. "He didn't just save me," Ethan answered softly. "He survived things no animal ever should have survived. And after everything humans did to him, he still chose kindness." The reporters fell silent. Even the cameras seemed still. Ethan slowly walked toward Shadow and rested a hand against the horse's neck. This farm won't become another business, he continued. It's going to become a rescue ranch. 4 abandoned horses. Injured horses. Forgotten horses. His voice cracked slightly. Because every animal deserves a second chance. Clara smiled through tears. Sheriff Dalton lowered his head quietly. And for the first time in years, Blackwood Farm no longer felt haunted. It felt alive again. Weeks passed. The story exploded online. Millions watched videos about Ethan and Shadow. People across the country donated money to help restore the farm. Volunteers arrived daily to repair fences, rebuild barns, and clean the damaged property. Veterinarians offered free treatment for rescued horses. Former riders who once feared Shadow now stood amazed watching the once wild stallion calmly follow Ethan around the ranch like an old friend. But healing wasn't instant. Shadow still carried scars. Sometimes loud noises made him panic. Storms often triggered terrifying memories from the fire. On difficult nights, Ethan would sit quietly inside the stable beside him for hours until the horse finally relaxed. And during those silent moments, Ethan slowly healed too. Because grief understands grief. Broken souls recognize each other. One evening near sunset, Ethan discovered something unexpected while repairing the old farmhouse porch. Hidden beneath a loose floorboard was another letter from his father. This one was addressed directly to him. Ethan sat down immediately and opened it with trembling hands. "Son, if you found this, then Shadow trusted you. That means I was right about you all along." Tears filled Ethan's eyes instantly. Not fearful this time. Hopeful. And as the wind carried the sound across the valley, Ethan smiled for the very first time without sadness in his heart. Because after years of loss, fire, secrets, and loneliness, the abandoned boy and the wild horse had finally found where they belonged. And maybe, just maybe, their story was only beginning. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes loyalty can survive even the darkest pain. Because sometimes the ones the world calls broken become the reason others heal.